There is something sinister about the coastline of the British Isles, which stretches for some 7,000 miles. It's home to grand hotels and picturesque promenades. On the surface, there are bright lights and funfairs, sandy beaches and beautiful sunsets. But dig a little deeper in the sand and you uncover an underworld of murder and mayhem. In Coastal Killers, we take a journey to the cliff's edge, where the land meets the sea and life meets death. A shoreline that is awash with tales of death and depravity. These are the chilling true stories of Britain's worst coastal killers. Today, we're in rural Wales to look at a very unusual case, the execution of a married couple by a female killer. But it's also a story about the atrocities committed by the Nazis in World War II and their long-lasting effects.
This is one of the strangest murder stories, or not murder, if you believe the official version of events, that I've ever come across.
An intelligent woman who had horrific wartime experiences, not realising that she couldn't shut the door on the past if she didn't deal with it, and feeling that there were no options other than to fight.
There were 2 executions. She was determined that if she couldn't have the house, they weren't going to have it either.
Machynlleth is a small, pretty market town close to the Welsh coast. In the 15th century, it was the seat of the Welsh Parliament, but for more than 100 years it's been a quiet tourist town. It attracts people who want a peaceful holiday in the beautiful hills and close to the beaches of the North Wales coast.
The Hartlands are an ordinary couple from the Midlands who, as many people in the Midlands still do today, decide to move to Wales, to experience this kind of more rural, quiet life. And Josie was still, pretty young. She was 33, her husband was a bit older. They're just an ordinary couple.
They both loved the outdoors, they loved walking, and they planned to spend their early retirement enjoying life in the beautiful surroundings of the North Wales hills near Machynlleth.
And they decided to look for a property that would suit their needs and their lifestyle, and they found a beautiful bungalow, as they described, a luxury bungalow, which had been built by a local gentleman by the name of Wander Chantler.
In 1975, they bought this bungalow. It was called Treasure Cottage.
Adam had built the bungalow in the early 70s, and he and his wife Wanda lived in the bungalow for a period of about 5-6 years.
Wander Chantler was a former British Army soldier who had served in the Second World War, and he'd met Wanda, who became his wife, when he liberated a Nazi concentration camp, and they'd set up home back in North Wales.
There are different accounts of what happened to Wanda in World War II. The account that's come down to us is that she met her husband at the end of World War II when he came to liberate the camp she was in. So he represented to her this kind of rescuer and a way to escape Germany, to escape her former life. So she can have this new life with him in Wales, and he's kind of her hero in that respect because he represents the allies who have come to rescue her.
We're not given any details, but we are told that when war broke out, she was in Germany studying law, and that she was interred as a foreign national, but then selected for a Nazi breeding program.
She said that she was forced to be a broodmare, someone who was to be mated repeatedly with SS officers to create an Aryan master race, the next generation who were to rule Adolf Hitler's supposed 1,000-year Reich.
She survived in that for several years. She escaped and was recaptured. Her camp was liberated, and that's when she met her husband, Mr. Chantler. But she never spoke about her experiences on that Nazi program.
It's not absolutely clear what her wartime experience was or wasn't. She has explained as part of her defence, and this is to some extent supported by her husband over the years previously, whether or not she was part of the breeding program, whether she went to it joyfully, what the benefits were that came to her, and how she later felt about her part in such things. She does say that she absconded and was then put into a labour camp in, I think, the northern part of Germany, which is where she met her husband when liberation came. So that is to some extent an unproven part of her life.
What I found during my own research is that she was originally from Poland, although some press reports say Russia. She was born around 1923, and I found references to a Wander Chantler in a book about Operation Gomorrah, which was a whole series of raids on Hamburg during World War II, that I think is the Wander Chantler in this case. She's described as living in a barracks in Hamburg. She's a young student. She's living with other women. She experiences some absolutely horrific things. She saw her barracks destroyed when she was in a shelter. She came back up, saw all the possessions destroyed, and then saw people she knew having been killed in a raid, their heads just on their own, staring at her from the ground. If this is the right Wanda, and I believe it is, you can understand why she would be so traumatised, why she would have mental health issues after the war, having seen things that most of us would never experience in our lifetimes or could understand fully.
If you think about the situation which most young girls of that age would hope to be in, they would be free to fall in love with whom they wanted, that they would be able to offer that love to the other person freely, because that's the intrinsic nature and action of love, isn't it? To offer yourself freely to another individual who reciprocates. And this was taken away from her. And it would be impossible, I think, to have that taken away without leaving a sense of being dehumanized, of not being able to trust relationships or the future.
What we do know is that she was so traumatised by her experience during World War II that her husband described her as waking up screaming in the night on a regular basis, that she had these awful nightmares about what had happened to her, and that she was still processing those feelings sort of years, decades later.
No, there's no indication at all that she was unhappy with Mr. Chantler. Far from it. They had 2 sons and made a life for themselves in Wales and seemed to be very settled.
On the surface, things look absolutely fine, but of course, in retrospect, you wonder how much of her previous life she is repressing, that she is trying not to think about, whilst trying to preserve this kind of veneer of respectability of ordinary British life.
But when one of the sons moved to Australia, she felt she couldn't stay where she was. She had to be near her son. The relationship with her son was hers, if you like. Not exclusively, but it was hers uniquely in a way that nobody else could have that relationship. So this was something which might have been taken away from her during the wartime experiences, but could not be taken away from her with the children that she had.
In 1975, Wanda and Alan decided to emigrate to Australia, and they decided obviously to put the bungalow up for sale. which they did. And the bungalow was bought by, it was perfect for what Josie and Roger Hartland wanted, and they purchased the bungalow from the Chantlers.
It was a deal that suited both parties. It gave the Chantlers the money they needed to begin their new life in Australia, and for Roger and Josie, Treasure Cottage was idyllic. It was the perfect new home for them to enjoy the surroundings and the countryside and the peace and the tranquility of North Wales.
But that peace and tranquility was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. Physiotherapist Wander Chantler had left a picturesque home in North Wales for a new life in Australia, but things were not working out down under. She was determined to return home, and her return would lead to a chain of events that would end in a double murder.
The move to Australia appears to have been traumatic on several counts, and the fact that she can't settle there, that she needs to come home, suggests that she needed that security of her home in Wales. That's what she associated with happiness, with security, and so she fixates on it. It's not just about being back in Wales, it's about being back at that house because that house is safety for her.
They stayed for 3 years in Australia before deciding it wasn't going to work, and they moved back, and they moved back not just to Britain, but they moved back to North Wales.
When they returned, Wanda was under the impression that she would be able to repurchase the bungalow that Alan had built. And the reason for this was that she absolutely loved the bungalow and felt that that was the only place really that they could live. She regretted bitterly that they'd sold the bungalow, and so she approached the Heartlands and discussed with them the repurchasing, the selling of the property back to them.
There are different reasons why people become attached to places. It sounds, it looks as though this house became deeply important to her for what it represented, that it was a place of security, of pleasure, that it was her place, her safety, and in a sense, she never let go of it. It was almost as though she came to feel, quite inappropriately, that she had been usurped by the people who then went to live there, and that they had taken from her something that was rightfully hers.
She was investing in that place a quality of passion and emotion which is not proper to invest in a place. It would be proper to invest it in a relationship with another person, but not in a geographical location in that way. And I imagine or surmise that the explanation for that lies in what we're told about her wartime experiences.
It's difficult to be clear exactly what the home meant to her. I think we know what she seemed to say it meant to her, that it became a place of safety, a dream, an ideal, but that she was initially quite happy to let it go. So if it was as important as later claimed, why did she move from it in the first place? So I think that's not quite a closed question.
She became what they initially described, Roger and Josie, as a nuisance. She kept constantly returning to the bungalow, offering them a purchase price for the bungalow, and almost bordering on demanding at some points that they sell it back to her. Of course, they declined and said no, they were more than happy to stay where they are, and that they wouldn't be selling the bungalow.
Wanda now associates the Heartlands with her problems. She blames them for the fact that she can't get back in her house, as she sees it as being. So she causes problems to try and get them to move out, and if she can't get them to move out, she's going to make them unhappy in that house.
It appears that Wanda's health, mental health, must have deteriorated at that point, certainly at that point in relation to the bungalow, because she became somewhat aggressive in her attempts to buy it back, and began spreading malicious rumours about the Heartlands and making up false stories in order to encourage them, if you like, to move out of the area. And one of the bizarre stories that Wanda, believed to be true was that there was a treasure trove, if you like, gold, buried under the bathroom floor at the bungalow. And this was a rumour that apparently was discussed in the village by a lot of the neighbours and friends.
Wanda clearly displays obsessive behaviour and a desire to focus on the house as kind of like her dream. You know, everything is centred around this house. And so she does these kind of repeated paintings of the house, and she romanticises it. It's what it represents to her rather than its physicality. So she is trying to paint it as she sees it, as what it represents to her. But again, it's another symptom of this obsession.
And at the same time as this obsession is developing, taking over Wanda's mind, she begins to train herself on firearms. She joins the local shooting club.
And she became what was described by the club as an expert shot. And she purchased a double-barrel shotgun and 2 air pistols.
It's really interesting, the fact that she decides to go out and learn to shoot well.
When she took up shooting, she had already formed, or at least half formed, the intention of taking her property back by direct action. I'm slightly puzzled by the local authorities' position in this, because having trained, having become reasonably good at shooting, she had the license withdrawn because they felt there were psychological issues attached, but they left the guns in place.
Approximately 2 weeks before the murders of Josie and Roger Heartland, her license, her firearms license in respect of all the weapons, was revoked on the basis that she was apparently suffering from agoraphobia, which is apparently the fear of open spaces. And because of that mental medical condition, of course, in line with legislation, the license was taken from her. But clearly, she hadn't returned the guns at the time of the murder.
I think the effort was tearing her mind apart, which is why she sort of slid into what was more obviously an illness.
I suspect that people didn't take her seriously. Okay, she's a bit upset about this house, but it'll pass. She'll get through this obsession. I think possibly the only person to maybe have more of an inkling that there was something else going on would be her husband, who knew of her background. It's very unusual for a woman to commit murder and commit it in such a horrific way. So I don't think there would have been an acknowledgement or a recognition that she might commit murder to get her own way. They just saw it as kind of, oh, she's a bit odd, she's doing a few odd things.
One evening, Wanda turns up at Treasure Cottage, and she turns up with a present, so she says, for the Heartlands. And it's a painting of Treasure Cottage, a painting that she has made.
Wanda presenting the Heartlands with one of her paintings is really significant because it shows how she's thinking. It shows what her motive is. The fact that she's saying it's about the house, it's about my place that I am so focused on that I can't stop thinking about. So it's psychologically, it's really interesting and it's fascinating, but it's also her highlighting why she's going to do what she's going to do.
I think she carried the painting with her in the same way that a soldier might fight under the flag of his country. I think she carried it as a token of what she was fighting for. And I think that also perhaps gives a hint as to the nature of the obsession with that physical building. She believed that she needed it in order to preserve a sense to herself of who she was as a person.
I think that her taking a painting with her was look, can you not see? This is mine. This has been with me for a long. Look, I have even done this. Please, I want my house back, and I cannot let you stand in the way of me recovering it.
She's also carrying something much less friendly. She's carrying the shotgun, which she should no longer be allowed, as well as 2 air pistols. And she confronts Roger at the house, raises the shotgun and shoots him dead. And she then forces her way into the house, into the living room. Josie is on the phone, calling for help.
Josie Hartland runs into the kitchen and is cowering in the kitchen on the floor, and she shoots Josie 4 times with the shotgun. So she reloads the shotgun twice. So there, with the reloading of the weapon and the manner of the shooting, of course, there is your clear intent to kill.
It's absolutely clear to me that this was an execution. This was very premeditated. Wanda knew what she was going to do. The fact that she shot Roger on the doorstep, so, you know, as soon as she could, she shot him clean dead. You then have poor Josie running through the house trying to make a 999 call. So she's kind of cornered in the kitchen. She rips the phone off the wall to make sure she can't communicate, and then she shoots her, you know, pretty close quarters.
In Wanda's mind, she had retaken Treasure Cottage, but at the cost of taking 2 innocent lives. And as if to prove she had retaken possession, she did not flee the murder scene, but sat waiting for the police or anyone else to arrive. In North Wales, a brutal double murder had taken place, and the shotgun-wielding killer had refused to leave the scene. Tragically, a call for help prior to the murder had not been heeded.
It's apparent that during that altercation, Roger, in fact, had attempted to ring Alan Chantler from the phone in the house and quickly informed him of the deterioration of the situation and Wanda's condition, and asked him to attend at the house. Sadly, it was 4 hours later when Alan arrived at the house, by which time, of course, Roger and Josie lay dead in the house.
I think she went expecting to fight. I don't know that she went expecting to kill. She seems to have started the shooting at a point, not at which she so much felt that she wasn't getting her way, but at a point at which she felt she was being not recognised for what she wanted. I understand that Mr. Hartland had phoned to try and get her husband to come and take her away, you know, presumably recognising that she was not well. And then she shot Mrs. Hartland while Mrs. Hartland was trying to phone the police.
Key here is double-barrel shotgun, as far as I know, and it has to be reloaded. So again, you see the deliberation. You see the fact that someone comes, 1 barrel kills the man, you go in and then fire once, stop, reload both barrels, assuming it's a double barrel, and you discharge both of those until the woman is dead. So it's not just a spur of the moment, I lost control issue. You have a person who has had to go to the effort of making some sort of decision, getting the shotgun, taking that and extra ammunition to reload, and going out and doing these terrible acts. So there is a deliberation in there. And then the question is why? Who was it that did that? Was it the woman in command of her usual senses, or is something else going on?
Immediately after she'd carried out the shootings, I think she was filled with either self-loathing or self-disgust in some way, which again I think goes back to what she was hoping that possession of this place would give her. And she took an overdose on the spot.
It's curious looking at the aftermath of the murders in that Wanda took a drug overdose afterwards, which suggests either that she came to an awareness of what she'd done, the enormity of it, and saw death for herself as the only way out, or she'd got her goal. She'd got rid of these kind of interlopers, as she saw it, from her house. Therefore, her mission was kind of done.
Even if there were psychological factors that affected her thinking, you still have a person who has her intellect available. She would know that it is over, that no one is going to say, here, the house is now yours, that we will overlook your culpability in killing these perfectly ordinary, perfectly reasonable people. She has to know that it's over. And she's done what she needed to do, and I think that's important, needed to do. After that, she'll take what comes.
Dr. Donald Waite was one of the country's leading Home Office forensic pathologists. On call that day, he received instructions to attend the murder scene.
Arriving at the house, outside was a mini station wagon. The back doors are open, and lying adjacent to the left front wheel was the body of a man who turned out to be Mr. Hartland, aged 47. Shotgun had been placed almost against the skin of his face, and he'd been shot. The back of his head was missing, and there was an entry gunshot wound to his left face. He'd been shot at very close range from a shotgun, which had blown the back of his head off, and lying just immediately beyond his head was a complete brain. She must have shot Mr. Hartland first and then chased after Mrs. Hartland. She shot, whether to frighten her, she shot a hole in the door. Going into the house, in the corner, in a very severe crouch position, was Mrs. Hartland, lady aged 33, and she'd been shot 3 times in the back. One of the wounds had been in the left shoulder, which was the closest that somebody coming behind with a shotgun could get to shooting her in the face. And then she had 2 more wounds close to the spine in the lower back.
It's not just the police who couldn't understand what Wanda had done. I think it would have been a common thing in her community or even in the country to go, well, why did she go to this length to try and get people out of her house? Why was she so obsessed with it? And I think without understanding her background and the kind of long-term impact of her traumatic early adulthood, I don't think you could understand it, because it is such an unusual case.
By the time the case comes to Mould Crown Court that autumn, Wander Chantler isn't charged with murder. She's charged instead with manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and she admits that. She pleads guilty to that. And the story she had told the police and told the court, and which was believed by the police and the prosecution and the judge, was truly extraordinary.
And the story was told to the court that when she was 15 years of age, she was part Russian in birth, and she was sent to Germany by her father to study law. Of course, the outbreak of the Second World War arrived, and Wanda was arrested by the Nazis and taken to an SS Hitler race, described as a race camp or breeding camp.
This experience of being repeatedly raped, really, by SS men to produce the next Aryan master race had affected her mind, that she blamed herself for this and that it had unhinged her.
And certainly what defending counsel said is that the experience that she underwent in Nazi Germany in this camp was so horrific that it affected her mental state, certainly for the 30, 40 years after. And that it was the explanation, if you like, for her violent and bizarre behaviour in connection with the murders.
I think it is important to recognise that most people who have survived Nazi atrocities or Nazi damage of one sort or another are given wide latitude in the rest of their lives because of what they suffered. And I have no doubt at all that this would have played towards her favour.
The judge said, I believe you. I believe that this terrible experience you had so destabilized, so turned your mind inside out that you were not legally responsible for murder.
And the judge actually commented that not only was Wanda a victim of Nazi Germany and that policy, but also the heartlands indirectly were victims of Nazi Germany by view of the acts that Wanda had carried out. The decision was that she would be sent abroad more because of her mental state, and in fact she spent a number of years at the facility.
You do have to wonder about the judge who said that, in a way, the Heartlands were as much a victim of Nazism as Wanda was, because that kind of puts them on the same level. And, you know, other people have these traumatic experiences but don't respond by becoming murderers. So, you know, you can't forget that the Heartlands were the victims in this case. You know, that they were innocent parties who were absolutely brutally gunned down. And so I find that quite difficult in terms of understanding what the judge said. I think that kind of serves to almost trivialise the offence or to treat it as about Wanda and not about her victims. Wander Chantler is unusual both for being a female murderer, because we know that the majority of murders in history and now are committed by men. Women commit a far fewer number, and when they do commit murder, it tends to be using different methods to men. You know, it's unlikely that a woman would normally choose to use a shotgun, but in this case, we have a female killer who kind of chases down her targets, really, in their own home with a shotgun. So this case is unusual for starters. But then you take into account the kind of sympathy that Wanda receives in court when she's charged with murder. She's treated with a lot more sympathy than you would normally find murderers get. And that's to do with her own kind of very traumatic background, living in Germany under Nazi rule.
The problem is that Wanda's story of SS breeding farms is a myth. It isn't and never was true. There was a Nazi program to create a new master race. It was called the Lebensborn program. And the Lebensborn was a series of maternity homes generally run by the SS, and it did take unmarried mothers and they gave birth in these homes, but they hadn't been mated with SS officers. They were maternity homes in which babies were initially born, and worse than that, babies and children were kidnapped by German troops from across the Eastern Territories, and they were brought into the Lebensborn program, and they were given to foster parents to raise as good Nazis who would theoretically go on to rule the Reich. But there was absolutely no truth in her story of SS breeding farms.
With Victorian cases involving murderesses that I've studied, these have been remembered as being these kind of shocking events that feature women who kill because it's unusual, whereas in this case it seems like it's almost been forgotten about. And I think that's partly because of the World War II aspect of it. We're not still comfortable about talking about the long-term impacts of World War II on ordinary women. So Wanda's case has kind of slipped through in a way. It's not received the publicity that you would expect a case involving a female killer of this type to receive.
So where did this story come from? It actually came from a 1961 movie, a sexploitation film, which invented this idea of breeding farms, SS breeding farms, and which promulgated this urban myth, if you like, throughout the world. And because the German government, successive German governments, refused for generations to release information on the Lebensborn program, this is what people knew. It wasn't true, but that didn't stop people believing it, and that is why Wander Chantler's story was believed. Now, none of this means that she didn't suffer terribly during the Second World War, nor does it mean that she wasn't necessarily raped or abused during the Second World War in a concentration camp of some description. But it does mean that the story she told to reduce her crime from murder to manslaughter was utterly untrue.
Her husband, Alan, as a point, stated that she never ever mentioned whether or not she actually gave birth to any of the SS officers, to any children. And he never pursued the matter with her. So that's an unknown factor. But of course, it may be that somewhere in Germany that she has children. And again, the mental effect on her that would have is immeasurable, and the damage that it would have done.
I don't think she realised how it might contribute to her undoing if she never talked about it, which she didn't. So I don't think she was in a position to understand that this was not something that would ever be anything other than, a sleeping dragon. I presume she pushed it out of mind because it was just too painful. She was able to dissociate herself from that experience and push it to a bit of the mind which she could keep unconscious so that she could get on with the rest of her life in a more conscious way. What she couldn't do was then turn the tide when that rankling became an obsession, nor could she prevent herself from acting out the problem in really quite a not just a violent way, but really quite a sadistic way. She went to hospital, which was the right course. I understand she's now left hospital, and I hope that she's been able to reconcile herself to what happened.
People who have been in the special hospitals or the secure units do move on. The aim, in the main, is not to keep them there, if you like, in a prison for the rest of their life. The requirement is to try to treat, to try to improve. And If it's judged that that has happened, then they usually are gradually released back into the community. Not much is made of this because so many people are apprehensive about having someone who has spent years in a special hospital suddenly living next door to them. People don't like that, and I think we understand it. But it does happen. And this is why the basis for the detention becomes significant. In the hospital orders, certainly at that time, some are made where the release follows a medical judgment, a clinical judgment alone. Others require a Home Secretarial approval to that, and that means we think this is sufficiently concerning to want an external view to confirm that the discharge is reasonable. And I would assume it's the second that's happened, and the folks have felt it's pretty safe to move on.
So it's almost as though she needed to commit these killings in order to get rid of whatever was troubling her in her head. And after that, she could then go back and live a normal life again.
Wanda and Alan moved to the Southampton area, and in 2009 she herself went into a care home and died a few years later. So again, it suggests that possibly she did have some sort of a normal life after many years of treatment in Broadmoor.
For me, at the bottom of it is a misplaced focus on a place rather than a personal relationship, because the focus which should have belonged to the relationship had been taken away from her years before during her wartime experience. So she was trying to make a place do what the place couldn't do, which is make her feel whole again. It's part of the human condition that we're born incomplete. We only achieve completeness not in relationship to a place or to an activity, but in relationship to another person. You know, one in which we feel valued, and which we value, and in which we feel accepted, and in which we are accepted.
I have quite a bit of sympathy for Wanda in this case, as a woman who was clearly traumatised and wasn't perhaps given the help she needed to process what she had been through. And it's one of those cases where you don't know who to feel sympathy for, in terms of most of the time you know that the victims are the only ones who deserve the sympathy. You know, whatever the perpetrator's done in their lives, you know, they are the guilty party. Whereas in this, there are no winners. You have two victims who were innocent parties who did not deserve what happened to them. But then you have a perpetrator who's clearly very troubled, who needed help and didn't get that help.
The story that Wanda told and her experiences, true or not, real or imagined, made her the victim in this tragedy. And yet, there were two other people who lost their lives, who were brutally shot to death in their own home, who were the real victims. Wander Chantler may well have suffered badly during the Second World War. No one should try and deny that that's a very real possibility. But so overpowering was her story that she became the victim rather than Roger and Josie Hartland, who were the true victims of this crime.
Wander Chantler is a rare example of a killer who has been granted some sympathy by the judge at her trial. Undoubtedly, she'd been traumatised in her youth, but that doesn't excuse the fact that two people were left dead as a result of her actions.